The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I am Josh Edison. He is MR
That's correct.
The M stands for millions of conspiracies swirling around his head.
It's true, of which only 3 can be active at any particular point in time. Otherwise, the insanity begins.
Probably for the best. We're both sitting here in Auckland in New Zealand. It's a fine-ish day outside. But
No, it's been raining all day.
Really? It's been one of those Auckland days where it's sunny and then rainy and then sunny and then rainy. But it was sunny last time I looked. But we have the curtains shut, otherwise the light comes from behind.
And then we become shadowy Illuminati figures.
Maybe that would be appropriate, actually.
It
would be good to do every episode in silhouette. Maybe
I think
that would actually
initially
suit the tone.
it would be good, and then long term it would be really, really frustrating to watch.
Well, probably. Maybe we can do it once or twice. Anyway, now, this is episode 152 by our counting, which means that 2 episodes was episode 150, and we forgot to actually mention
Surprise!
that significant milestone. It also means that 1 episode ago, it was episode 151, where we said we probably should have mentioned that it was episode 151 week ago, and we forgot to do that as well. So now 2 weeks late, it was 150 episodes 2 weeks ago. So yay us, but not our memories, I guess.
Well, it just shows that we don't consider these things to be important milestones.
No, exactly.
What we're interested in is the content, not the style, as you can tell by the professional studio which we're recording in right now.
Exactly. These are high quality curtains. They seem to block light. Thermally lined, I assume. Good
why
quality.
would you assume they're thermally lined? We don't do insulation in this country.
No, I thought most curtains were. Anyway. We have
Welcome
curtains.
to the Podcaster's Guide to Millinery and Other Fabric Issues.
So, after our little detour into literary criticism last week, we're back on our false flag kick.
We are indeed.
But before we start kicking another false flag, we should do some news.
I would have gone with we should kick the news.
Kick the news?
Kick the news?
I would like to kick the news.
Well, let's kick the news right now.
Very well.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
In news, which is either conspiratorial or just PR, USA Vice President Mike Pence went to an NFL game earlier this week in order to walk out of it.
Yes, news came out that Pence attended a game and then walked out when he saw players disrespecting America by kneeling when they should have been standing or something, only for news to then come out that he deliberately diverted himself from official duties to attend the game knowing kneeling would occur, with further news indicating Trump had put him up to it.
It's news which, if it doesn't suggest a conspiracy, posits something awfully close to it.
Meanwhile, in America, don't drunks claim the weirdest things? A man in Wyoming recently claimed he had travelled back in time to warn of an alien invasion and that he was only able to travel in time because aliens filled his body with alcohol.
I wish aliens would fill my body with alcohol.
You do it,
Now, this is news which isn't strictly conspiratorial, but it was just too good not to share. The kicker is that apparently he was only meant to travel back to 2018. So I guess we've got another year to prepare for our Independence Day.
Yeah, certainly that story would have made a better sequel than Resurgence.
Oh,
It's your bit.
It is, yes, you're right. Sorry. I was just thinking about Resurgence, which is an awful, awful film. I mean, really, quite remarkably.
I restrained myself from seeing it. I didn't think any good could come
Continue
of watching
to
that
restrain
film.
yourself from seeing it.
I will.
Yeah, no. Meanwhile, John Rappaport, whose work we've discussed before, is claiming that the Vegas shooting by Stephen Paddock is both real and fake. In short, Rappaport claims the authorities and media deliberately mix in fake details with the facts in order to make people become uncertain of the truth and thus more receptive to the lies of the people behind the curtain.
This hypothesis, that all or most of these mass shooting events are staged in order to create confusion in the masses, is an increasingly common response by certain mass shooting conspiracy theorists. It's certainly an interesting hypothesis, use an event to your advantage. Indeed, it's very much one of the more plausible 9/11 theories. Bush, Cheney and co. used the September 11th attacks to justify the invasion of the Middle East. But the complex epistemic state that allows an event to be both fake and real, maybe Mr. Rappaport should leave epistemology to the experts.
Meanwhile, good news for weather manipulation conspiracy theorists, HARP is back in action, baby.
Yes. In news we should have known about earlier, the HARP installation in Alaska, after its closure as a USAF research site in 2015, was transferred to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Isn't that what USAF stands for? Or is that US Air Force?
Yeah,
The
US
original?
Air Force.
Okay,
It's convenient, though, that the University of Alaska Fairbanks looks
has
an
the same
awful lot.
acronym.
Well, there's no S.
Because it's a university, not United States.
Yeah.
I mean, you and your acronyms, Matthew, I blame. It's High Frequency Active Oral Research Program anyway. There's an F that nobody ever mentions. So I don't see that you can complain about my acronyms when HARP doesn't even put the F that rightfully belongs there.
Yes,
it
but
should be HARP.
But why
We've
would a
been over
university put an S in the middle of its name when there's no S in the university?
Specifically to make me look like a fool, Matthew.
And it's worked.
Anyway, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, or UAF, I suppose, who've been using the High Frequency Active Oral Research Program, or HFARP, for their own experimentation since February of this year. As usual, details of the experiments are all available online, so get at it and draw your own conclusions about those various natural disasters.
Meanwhile, G. Cope Shellhorn asks, is someone killing our UFO investigators?
Yes, in the last 10 years, 137 people in the field have died, including at least one Pope and US President.
The same person?
Presumably, JFK was the Pope, right? And died in the last 10 years? Yeah. Anyway, some of the 137 have died of natural causes, but at unexpectedly young ages. Others died in mysterious circumstances, and there have been a few suicides. The big question is who might be behind these deaths if we accept there is something mysterious about the collection of them as a whole.
Well, according to Shellhorn, what we may have is a concatenation, a spider web of interweaving threads which are causal and often, in fact, deadly. One thread is the activities of the US and other intelligence agencies. Another thread is possible ET involvement. A third thread is the involvement of certain sci-tech think tanks and private sci-PK practitioners, including negative occultists. A possible fourth thread is highly reactionary religious cults which feel they are carrying out the will of God. It is more than likely that one or more or all of the above agencies are responsible in whole or in part for many of the deaths from the recent past, which have already been mentioned, and many of those remaining cases from the present to the more distant past, some of which we may now explore.
So, everyone.
Basically, yes.
In the end, though, the problem is that number 137. Some of these deaths really do appear to be pure accident. For example, one of the 137, John Edward Mack, was killed when a drunk driver drove into him. Others are natural causes, like deaths from diabetes and the like. Given the lack of an overarching thesis which explains most of these deaths as mysterious, the claim of a conspiracy to wipe out UFO researchers seems less plausible than happenstance.
Now, that's not to say we shouldn't investigate these deaths and ask, is there a link? But part of that investigation would require working out the base rate of these kinds of deaths for the entire population as a whole, and then looking at whether ufologists really are at a greater risk than the rest of us.
And that's the way the news goes.
Too soon.
So. Today, but the last couple of false flags we looked at were the Gleiwitz incident and the shelling of Mynila, both events that happened sort
Istanbul
of in the...
pogrom.
The Istanbul pogrom, sorry, yes. The first two, were events leading up to World War II. What we're going to talk about today is the wonderfully Britishly named Operation Embarrass.
I say, Joshua, Operation Embarrass. That sounds a little bit embarrassing, truth be told, what, hey?
If I'd thought I'd have worn a monocle so that I could pop it out in surprise as I raised my eyebrows.
You can always draw one on your face and see what happens.
I could, but I'd look a little bit strange with a monocle on, drawn under my glasses.
No stranger than you look now.
Probably that's true. Nevertheless, it was something that happened directly following World War II. Now, after World War II, when the world witnessed the horrors that had been inflicted upon the Jewish people with the Holocaust and various other pogroms, I assume then that the people of England would have cast away centuries of ingrained anti-Semitism and welcomed Jewish refugees with open arms?
Oh,
Tell me that happened,
Joshua.
Matthew. Surely that's something that would
No,
have happened.
unfortunately, after World War II, anti-Semitism continued to be a very popular position in Europe, the UK, and the USA.
Well, that's quite a shame.
And so because of that, there were fears by people in the Clement Attlee government after World War II that Jewish peoples might try to leave Europe, or the region at that time known as Palestine, and come to the UK. And so what we needed was a plan. A plan, Joshua, to make sure that those belly Jews don't turn up in our ports. We don't want any illegal immigration of Jews into our country, thank you, what, pip, pip, hooray.
But I suppose they didn't want to look perhaps embarrassed by being openly...
It would be very embarrassed to find out that we don't want any Jews in our
Yes,
population.
if they were to be openly anti-Semitic, and especially against people who'd been through the worst that any particular ethnic group has possibly ever been through. So they set about a false flag. That's why we're talking about it today. They decided to... Well, what did they decide to do, Matthew?
Well, they wanted to deter merchant naval vessels from engaging in the trafficking of Jewish immigrants, which were basically refugees at that time, to the UK. So they devised a whole set of plans, direct action against refugee ships, a propaganda campaign, and a scheme to disrupt immigration from Black Sea ports by engaging in activities that would deter merchant naval vessels from carrying Jewish passengers to the UK. So that included making sure that captains discovered unexploded bombs on their ships to make them wary about carrying any more passengers, setting fire to ships in port, hopefully when they were empty and the like, and to ensure that the UK government wasn't going to be blamed, they created an organisation, and they literally did create an organisation called the Defenders of Arab Palestine, that they could then blame these acts of sabotage upon.
Yes, so there we have it. They wanted a specific out. They wanted to deter Jewish refugees from finding their way to England, and decided to put people off through an operation that would then be blamed on Middle Easterns. And indeed, where was the bit about? Yes, the fact that they simply actually went as far as using British-made limpet mines, which they stuck on the sides of boats, which I believe, yes, they were discovered before they went off. So I don't believe they planned to actually destroy the ships.
No,
they probably wouldn't have.
The idea was that ships' captains would discover these limpet mines on their ships before they left port, and go, oh, who put that on there? Oh, the Defenders of Arab Palestine. Oh, we're under threat. Sorry, Jewish refugees, no shipments for you today.
But they sort of pointed out that this was a lot of this, or at least the business with the limpet mines was happening in Italy. I'm not sure which other ports they went after, but the fact that the limpet mines, which were found unexploded and presumably removed, were British limpet mines, but apparently the Italian police thought that wasn't too suspicious because Arabs would most likely have got their weapons from Britain anyway.
Yes, which gets us into the other sordid part of the story, which was, of course, the UK was interested in fostering good relationships with the Arab nations of the Middle East at the time, in part because they wanted that lovely, lovely oil wealth. And of course they were engaging in weapons trading with those nations. So of course Middle Eastern groups like the Defenders of Arab Palestine, a UK created but located in the Middle East terrorist group towards Jewish refugees, would of course have access to British weaponry because the British were trading with those groups to give them those weapons in the first place. Ends up being a very plausible cover story.
So some more details of the false flag operation itself. The personnel of Operation Embarrass were told that no provable link between the acts of sabotage or the government of the UK should ever be shown. So there was very much a focus on plausible deniability. They very definitely wanted to do this without it ever getting back that they were the one, that England was actually the ones who were doing it. Yes, this propaganda network Matthew mentioned was set up under a communications network codenamed Ocean, which was set up with a budget of £30,000. I have no idea what that accounts to in today's money. £30,000 in 1946
would have been
sounds
a lot
like
of money.
a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yes. There was the direct action against the refugee ships, there was the propaganda campaign, and the disrupting immigration. With the two together, you have the actual direct action, the setting on fire of ships, the mining of ships, and the tampering with fresh water supplies or the crew's food, I think was another one. So things are actually happening. Then you have the propaganda going along to say, hey, we the defenders of Arab Palestine don't want you taking on any Jewish refugees. If you do, we'll blow up your ships and set fire to them and tamper with your water supplies. A fairly, I want to say, effective campaign. Except I believe it wasn't really.
Yes, so between 1947 and 1948, 5 attacks were undertaken in Italian ports, one of which resulted in a ship being lost, and 2 others being damaged. But basically the campaign itself had little to no effect on Jewish immigration at that particular point in time, in part because the situation in Europe and Palestine was so bad that people were willing to take these risks regardless. And the humanitarian efforts that were going on at the time were going, well, the risks are real, but these people are suffering, so we are also willing to take on those costs.
So, how does this compare to the ones that we've looked at in the past? I mean, we've had false flag operations designed to sort of bolster one's case for war. I didn't actually say, I probably should have mentioned this slight, if you'll allow me a slight tangent.
I'll allow you a digression.
Operation WWII. When I was looking up on it, most of our information came straight out of Wikipedia, as does most of everyone's information in the world ever. I went looking a little bit further afield and stopped fairly quickly because one of the first results I found about the WWII incidents was an article talking about how it wasn't a false flag at all, and it was just being talked up as such to bolster the post-war Nuremberg trial case against Germany. And really, that Hitler fellow wasn't so bad after all, and wasn't really to blame for everything they have now. Like, okay, I'm just going to stop now.
Yes, because I mean, often with these false flag events, there are going to be patriotic members of the particular nation state who will go, well, I know people say that we did that, but we really didn't. And in some cases, that may well turn out to be true. So it's always going to be possible that some of the false flag stories we're talking about actually weren't false flags, but the victors have written history to make a pivotal point or a fulcrum point in a particular conflict be the responsibility of the opposite side. But then when you get to but Hitler isn't that bad after all, you end up going, I think there might be slightly more than just evidence-based argumentation going on here. I think there might be a bit of political ideology informing, although that being said, our political ideology that goes Hitler was a rum egg and probably was a very, very bad man, probably informs our views as well.
Although
but Hitler was a bad man.
Although if I can have a digression to my digression, The Daily Show used to have a podcast back when Jon Stewart was on it, and it would be they'd never have Jon Stewart on it. They'd have all the various other correspondents talking about stuff. And one time they had on Trevor Noah before he became the new host.
Before he became Trevor Noah.
Indeed, and mentioned that in South Africa, in Africa, Hitler was a name that people. There were people called Hitler there, and he mentioned this to a Jewish friend. He knew this African guy called Hitler, and his friend was like, what the hell? Seriously? And he was like, in Africa, Hitler's just one in a long line of powerful bad men. He's not like in Western society. Hitler is basically shorthand for the worst human being ever. But in Africa, he was just one of many, which was interesting. And a powerful man who stamped his mark on the world, who was worthy of at least respect, if not admiration. So it was an interesting cultural difference there.
Interesting. Although I suppose it also speaks to, when we think of World War II as a world war, of course there were large sections of the world that were completely unaffected by warfare. The south of Africa, South Africa specifically, South America, all these nation states that by and large weren't involved and were far away from the theatre of war. presumably that has an effect upon the way that you think about it, was we are equally as far away from the theatre of war, but of course as a member of the British Empire and then the Commonwealth, we were involved in that war because the British went, you troops from the Southern Hemisphere, come with us. We're going to put you on the firing line and kill a lot of you, because that's what we like doing. You bloody colonials. You all deserve to die.
But anyway, enough
embarrassing.
digressing. Indeed. Back to Operation Embarrass. So we've looked at false flags designed to sort of build the case for going into war. We looked at a false flag designed to basically kick the shit out of an ethnic group that the perpetrators didn't like. This one, it's more. It feels a bit more sort of, first of all, political. I mean, it's not trying to start a war or start a riot. It's trying to sort of achieve a political end related to immigration and racism, I suppose. And also, it's more sort of, what would you say, speculative? I mean, it's trying to prevent a thing from happening rather than make a thing happen.
Yes, so I mean, after World War II, it was fairly clear that there was going to be a lot of Jewish immigration due to what happened in World War II. And I mean, one of the great shames for our nation, Aotearoa New Zealand, is that we were one of the few Western nations involved in the war that quite strenuously said we don't want any Jewish refugees post-World War II. So our country was incredibly racist towards the Jewish people, going, it's very sad what happened to them, but Jewish people aren't our kind of people, so we don't want any. But we were open and frank about that. That was debated in the House of Parliament. Do we want any Jewish refugees? No, we don't. So, but the UK was going, I mean, we've got a substantial Jewish population living here anyway, and we've been involved in the liberation of concentration camps throughout the theatre of war in Europe. At the same time, we're not really comfortable with these Jewish people, so we don't want them to come here, but it's a bit embarrassing to tell them that. Let's just try and dissuade them. But let's not do that kind of passive-aggressive dissuasion that the British do. Let's blame someone else. Let's make them think that they're not welcome here, not because we don't want them, because of course we don't, but we're going to say we do. We're going to make it look as if there are forces in the Middle East who are trying to prevent them from getting here, and they'd really be risking their lives if they tried to get here, so it's best off they don't.
So I guess this leads to the last question. Given that the personnel of Operation Embarrass were under their sort of strict orders to make sure that no link between the sabotage and the English government should be found. In fact, I think one thing we didn't mention was that the plan was that if they were captured, they were to claim to have been recruited in New York by an anti-communist organisation formed by a group of international industrialists, mainly in the oil and aircraft industries.
Which does sound like a military-industrial complex conspiracy theory.
But we're talking about it now, so how do we know that it was a false flag operation?
Because it was revealed in a book by Keith Jeffreys, which was the official history of MI6. And we should stress it was the official history of MI6. It was authorised with permission of the Secret Intelligence Service and the controller of Her Majesty's Stationery Office. So it has the imprimatur of the British government and the British Crown as the authorised history of MI6. And Jeffreys was given full access to the MI6 archives and then told, you can read everything, but you have to ask for permission to talk about particular stories. He was told he was not allowed to report on any cases of traitorous agents who had not yet been named in the media because those stories were still under lock and key. And he said there were lots of stories of this particular type, but he chose to highlight Operation Embarrass as an exemplar of what MI6 were doing at that time. So we know about it because a historian has written a book about it, and MI6 have said, yes, this actually happened.
And I should point out, this was 2010.
Yes, so it's been known for quite some time now.
Yes, and yet was, 65 years, nearly... Yeah,
well, a lot of stuff in World War II is still under the Official Secrets Act. So even though we know a lot of what happened at Bletchley Park, including the breaking of the Enigma Code, some of the things they did at Bletchley Park are still under lock and key and won't be revealed for quite some time.
Right, so when it comes to the sort of the general discussion around false flag theories and whether or not they're plausible or common and so on. So and here we have a case where the only reason we know about it is that 60 years later the government allowed information about it to be published.
Yeah.
And we know that there are similar ones that they
Which have not
bothered to
been
mention.
published at this particular point in time.
So what does that tell us then?
Well, it tells us that these things are a lot more common than most of us think. So we have, particularly around wartime, false flags would, I would say, be a fairly common tactic in modern warfare. The D-Day landings are a great example of an elaborate disinformation campaign. The reason why we call it D-Day is that there were 3 other days, A, B and C, and the Allies spent a lot of time trying to make sure that German High Command were unsure which of these 4 days was going to be the invasion day, and also to be unsure as to where the invasion was going to occur, to make sure that the landings at Normandy would be successful, because of course the Germans had armed the coast of Europe with massive, massive guns that could just kill thousands of soldiers at a sheer glance. So you had to make sure that they thought other things were going on at the time. And so around World War II in particular, there are lots of examples of false flags we know about. And the Jeffries book indicates there's probably a lot more than we know about, which indicates these things are a lot more common than we currently suspect them of being.
Which still, though, doesn't mean you can point to, say, the latest mass shooting in America, whichever one that happens to be, and say, oh, this must have been a false flag. Because, as usual, you really need to look at the evidence on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, so if you're going to be judging these things, the existence of false flags as examples in history tell us that the prior probability that a false flag is in the mix is higher than most of us think. But you still have to look at the posterior probability, the evidence to hand, and then compare the different theses, the relevance class, before you can go, oh, it's likely to be a false flag. Just because we know false flags occur, all that tells us is that we shouldn't dismiss a false flag claim out of hand. It doesn't tell us it's very likely. It just tells us it should be in consideration when we're looking at rival hypotheses.
Well, I think that wraps things up.
It does. I think it wraps things up in a tidy wee bow.
Should have said package, then I could have sniggered.
I'm sniggering at your package right now.
Well, what's new? So, is there any no last thoughts? No. I guess that pretty much was a last thought.
It really was.
And
now you are now demanding a second last thought.
Well,
you're making my last thought a penultimate
it didn't mean it
thought.
had to be about the false flags.
My last thought is you are going to die.
Well, that will be your last thought. I'm sure it will.
It'll be your last thought too.
Well, okay, yes, fine.
We should just end this
murder-suicide
episode on strangulation.
Would mutual strangulation work? Surely one of you would pass out before the other, unless you were just so perfectly in sync with your strangulation techniques that you both managed to asphyxiate instantaneously.
Now you're making it sound like a fetish.
I know. Yeah. Maybe something for after the cameras go off.
Yeah.
So, putting off the inevitable, I will just do a little bit of a wrap-up segment here and say that you have been, and presumably will be, listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. You may be watching...
Podcasters?
Same thing. See,
It is October, it is Halloween. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Work,
the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. They did the mash. They did the conspiracy mash, they did the mash. It was an underground smash, they did the mash. They did the conspiracy mash, they did the mash.
No, never do that again. I was going to say that as an ex-linguist, I do need to point out that the k and g sounds are essentially the same thing, just one involves voicing of the voice box, so that any sort of a giggle or a burp or anything that can turn a k into a g quite easily. And quite frankly, you should feel ashamed of yourself.
I never feel ashamed of myself. I only ever feel ashamed of you.
Well, I guess that's fair. At any rate, Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy is what you are listening to or watching right now. because we give you that option. The podcast/vodcast is available on iTunes and Stitcher and a few other places.
YouTube.
And on YouTube, where you can, if you're listening to it right now and you really, really, really want to put faces to the voices, I guess, or want to see what the curtains in Matthew's room look like, you can do that. Just go on YouTube and search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. As to you and I, that's him and me, not you and the audience and me, because I don't know all of your contact details. I'm assuming there's too many of them.
Although if we did, that would be quite freakish.
Yes, and make for quite an interesting conspiracy. I'll just do myself. My name's Josh Addison. I live in Auckland in New Zealand, and if you wanted to get in touch with me, you could do so on Twitter with the username monkeyfluids. Over to you.
I'm M. Dentith, and you can contact me via Twitter on HORansom or Conspiracism, and you can find my blog at episto.org, where occasionally I write about conspiracy theories, but often I just put links to this podcast.
We have a patronage account on Patreon, and also, as this website is hosted on podbean.com at conspiracism.podbean.com, you can also use their patronage system there to flick us a little bit of money. We have negligible hosting costs, but it would be nice to maybe get chairs that are the same level, so I don't look shorter than Matthew, even though we're around the same height.
And also a chair that doesn't squeak as much. Although now, of course, they're not squeaking at all.
This one's not too bad, so... Yes, you could do it if you felt it, like it, or not. Quite frankly, it's a free world. So with that ringing endorsement of the freedom inherent in our existence as privileged first world people, I suppose, we should add that disclaimer, I think it's time to say goodbye. Is it time to say goodbye?
It is time to say goodbye.
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 You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Matthew R.X. Dentith, and produced by Matthew R.X. Dentith. If you've enjoyed the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, why not contribute to our Patreon or Podbean patron page? And you can contact us on podcastconspiracy@gmail.com. That's podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.